Today I'm meeting again with James Ott, a licensed therapist and certified interventionist. And before we get into today's topic, James, would you please give your contact information to those who found what you had to say interesting and if they'd like to talk to you further?
Yes, my name is James Ott, and I have a practice in downtown Salt Lake City, and it is called Red Willow Counseling and Recovery. My website is redwillowcounseling.com, and my phone number is 385-313-0055. My email address is simply james@redwillowcounseling.com.
Thank you. Now, we're excited to talk about this subject today because it's one that so many people dealing with divorce and other family law challenges face, and that is addiction. And you're an addiction counselor specifically, right?
Yes.
And so tell us what it is that you thought people need to know about when it comes to addiction and the family dynamic. We spoke before we went on camera, and you're in for a treat today because everybody knows somebody, whether it be your own mother, father, or sibling, or someone in your immediate or your more widespread family member. You're going to be touched by this in one way or another. And what James has to say is going to be really enlightening, and I believe somewhat comforting to you too, because you're going to have a better idea as to where you stand. So take it away.
Well, Eric, first off, I would like to talk about addiction as a family disease. And when we say that, we mean a couple of different things. Normally people think of addiction as a family disease with the genetics component, meaning my father had an alcohol problem, his father had an alcohol problem, so therefore it's a family disease in the fact that I've got these genetics that's going to likely promote or influence alcoholism in myself. But I also want to talk about addiction as a family disease in the sense of how families impact each other. And we talk about families as a system, and I frequently use the metaphor as like the solar system. And if you move one planet, let's say you move Jupiter 100,000 miles closer to the sun, it's going to impact all of the other planets in the solar system. And that's the same with the family. If one person gets involved in alcoholism, then it's going to impact all the other family members, and in a sense to fill voids and fill roles.
Not in the same way. There's going to be one alcoholic, but the whole family will be adversely affected.
Absolutely. The whole family is impacted by the disease. And that in a sense is the third part, is there's this myth that alcohol or addiction is only impacting myself. And really it is impacting all of the family members negatively. So addiction is a family disease in that capacity. Let
me pick up there then. So what if I'm a functioning alcoholic, meaning that no one is aware, no one's ever come out and outright accused me of having an alcohol abuse problem? Is my family being adversely affected then?
Absolutely, and to a greater or lesser extent, because even if I'm a functional alcoholic, then my wife or my child may have to cover up for me, or the impact of my absence. Again, even if I'm functioning as an alcoholic, I'm still having a level of impact. I might be, let's say I'm only 20% less present in the home, there's still 20% of an impact on my children.
Yeah, people don't know that I'm 20% less because they've never seen it.
They've never seen that,
okay.
Yes. And so that's, even if it's in small ways or great ways, depending on the severity of the illness, then it's going to impact the family.
Okay. What are some other ways that, and we're not going to limit this just to alcohol, right? We're talking about substance abuse specifically, right? There can be other addictions as well. We could talk about pornography addictions and sex addictions, and whether or not there even is a sex addiction involved, or it might be some other, it might be symptomatic of something else. But we're going to limit today's conversation, if I'm correct, to substance abuse, right?
Yes, and my primary expertise is substance abuse, but a lot of the same rules do apply, because in a sense addiction is addiction. A lot of people with a gambling addiction or a sex addiction or a love addiction or a food addiction or a work addiction, a lot of the symptoms are the same, a lot of the impact to the family is the same, and so,
and in some cases there could be substance abuse and other addictions that are non-substance related that overlap.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And sometimes one member might have an alcohol addiction, another member might have a food addiction, or another member might have an exercise addiction. So it's not all just one person that manifests the illness of the family.
This is something we didn't talk about, but I'm just going to address that now if you don't mind. Some people will hear that and go, oh, great, so now there's such a thing as a love addiction or there's an exercise addiction. Come on. I mean, there are certain things that we all agree are addictions. You shouldn't drink to excess. You shouldn't take heroin. But come on, love addictions? Would you explain to people what you in the mental health profession, how you describe or define addictions, and why it is that even if somebody might not consider that an addiction, why it is that any kind of behavior can reach addictive levels? Could you do that?
Absolutely. And of course, there's a lot of variety of addiction definitions out there. The American Society of Addictive Medicine has a great definition. It's like 3 paragraphs long. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual has its own definition of addiction, but there's a really simple definition that I frequently use, and that is addiction is when you have a pathological relationship to any mood-altering experience that has life-damaging consequences. So you got to have the relationship that's pathological, meaning it's out of proportion, that alters your mood, and that damages aspects of your life.
Okay, and so let's do this. Let's give us an example of where exercise is an addiction.
Okay, so if I have an addictive relationship to exercise, okay, my relationship with my relationship with exercise is going to be to an extent that it consumes my life. My whole day is going to revolve around when I exercise, how long, and to extreme levels or quote-unquote pathological levels. It's engaging in this exercise, it's going to impact my mood in a variety of ways, whether I feel elevated because of the exercise affects itself, or whether I have such anxiety about my body weight or about my image. It's going to change my mood in the sense that I'm relieved that I'm exercising because now I'm going to look really buff or whatever.
But where have I endangered myself? So far it sounds like, and this is a setup question. So far I'm just being vain. But okay. What damage have I done?
So the life-damaging consequences could take impact in a variety of ways. If I'm exercising to levels where I'm neglecting my work, okay, or spending too much money exercising, I'm employing trainers or food supplements that's beyond my capacity for finances. If I'm neglecting personal relationships in my life, I'm neglecting my partner or my family or whoever, these are ways that I have life-damaging consequences. Okay. Or I'm endangering my health. I'm consuming supplements, or I'm stressing my body so much, yeah, I have long-term negative life effects.
Yeah, and we know there are people that can actually exercise to the point where they age their body prematurely, rather than
Absolutely.
Getting the youthful benefits.
Yeah.
So with substance abuse and the family dynamic, would you like to start at this point? You tell me. You want to get to the point where something gives, either in the addict or in one of the family members, that causes help to be sought, either because somebody gives an ultimatum, it's like, you will get help or I'm leaving. Mm-hmm. The kids and I are leaving. Or one day I woke up, passed out on the floor, and I realized that, or one day I almost killed somebody in a crosswalk, or, can you tell us about what those breaking points are, and if that's a good way to do it? Or just where do we get to the point where help is sought? What are some of the triggers? Okay. Is that a good place to start?
Yeah,
okay.
It's actually a good place to start. First off, while we know that addiction is a family disease and it impacts the whole family, we also know that healing must be a family effort as well, right? Very rarely, again, is addiction in an isolated bubble. And
in fact, that actually seems more simple than it does on it. It seems more simple on its face than it really is. So let's assume that I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a functioning alcoholic, and I realize I am an alcoholic because I almost killed some little kid in a crosswalk. And for whatever reason, that's when it put the fear of God into me. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the Ray Charles movie where Ray realizes that his heroin addiction is terrible, so he just goes and dries out all by himself, mm-hmm. if the movie is to be believed. Mm-hmm. So I just said, that's it. I'm not going to touch another drop of alcohol, and I don't. I stopped drinking, and it's hard, but I know, you know, and people can see I'm maybe a little edgy and irritable, but nobody really, they just think maybe it's the stress of my job. So everything's fine now, right? I mean, I'm not drinking anymore. What's wrong with that? Now I'm oversimplifying. Why do my family members need to heal? I'm a functioning alcoholic.
Well, for a variety of reasons. Number
Is that a good place to start?
Yeah,
okay.
let's start there. Number one is there's a difference between sobriety and recovery. Sobriety is going without the substance, but you could very well.
I've recovered, James.
Well, then
I'm sober. I've recovered.
If that was the truth, then I wouldn't have my job.
Okay.
Right? And we'd just have detox centers with sober people up and then be done. But if the underlying reasons for the addiction isn't being addressed, then you're not going to be entering recovery. You're what's termed as a dry drunk.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
Right.
Maybe it's something I should be. Okay, so a dry drunk is someone who is sober, but what? What's the remaining residual pathology?
Whatever it is that in a sense, is driving the addiction has not been resolved. And a lot of times, a dry drunk behavior is similar to a person in addiction.
Okay.
In fact, there's a great movie. I don't know if you've seen it, called Changing Lanes.
No. Heard about it, but
yeah. It has Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Affleck in it, and Samuel L. Jackson is sober, but a lot of his behavior in that movie is addiction related. We call it addictive behavior.
So sometimes you can be a dry drunk and you still have problems, or I guess the other thing would be, I stopped drinking and instead took OxyContin,
well, that even wouldn't be sobriety. You know,
okay.
A dry drunk is someone who responds to life's challenges in that same type of addictive way. And what you're talking about there is also cross-addiction.
Cross-addiction.
I stopped drinking, but now I'm using OxyContin or benzodiazepines or whatever it is to numb myself, to help me deal with life.
Okay. So we've dealt with that rare instance where somebody might realize there's a problem and get sober without addressing the underlying problems. Mm-hmm. Let's deal with the more common situation then, where somebody either gets caught or the family, it's no secret at all, and something finally breaks. Do you mind if I ask it this way? Is it usually the addict who chooses to get help, or does somebody have to lay down an ultimatum, whether that be a family member or maybe even an employer? What's in your experience?
Well, so let's talk about this, because there's a lot of myths centered around this. I mean, it's interesting you talk about laying down an ultimatum and the family doing that.
Okay. We'll just start from there.
Because this is what the research shows. Again, do people get sober in a bubble? Absolutely. That can occur. But for the majority of us, not only, again, the problem can be centered in the family, but the solution is centered in the family as well. And by gathering the family around us, by having transparency and openness about what's happened and what is happening, that's the start of the healing process. And so that we know that family members are a lot more influential than professionals, than lawyers and therapists. And so that's why, again, we want to work with the whole family system to get well.
Has that always been known, or is that something relatively recent where?
It's whether it's anecdotal or now there's a lot of research done on that, where there's really a 5-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
Family members are 5 times as influential on a person changing behavior, in the sense engaging in recovery, than professionals. And so by a professional like me utilizing the family to rally around the person, that's far more influential than if I'm going and going to talk the person into getting sober.
Okay.
And so let's talk about how this happens, because there's this myth with families, a huge myth that, is that a family member needs to hit rock bottom, right? Now, that would be like me saying, my dad has a heart disease, but I'm concerned about what he's eating and his triglycerides and cholesterol levels and his arteries, but I'm not going to intervene until he has a heart attack.
Until he has a heart attack.
Right? So people with addiction do not have to hit rock bottom to get help, and for the family to in a sense, intervene. But
isn't that like saying that you don't need to start getting exercise when you get fat? You should start before. Do most people seek treatment before they hit rock bottom, or almost before they hit rock bottom, or is it pretty much across the board? You've got 30% who catch it before it becomes an addiction, or just at the beginning, and 30% who do it at rock bottom, and 30% in the middle. I mean, is it all across the spectrum?
I don't know what the spectrum, and also rock bottom is very subjective, right? So in a sense, everyone hits a rock bottom, but it varies. For some people, it's death.
That's a good point, though.
And other people, it's getting a DUI, right? But at some point, people are more susceptible to engaging in treatment, and I want to stress that families do not have to wait to intervene or to try to attempt to get their family member help or get them well. And again, I'm going to go back to your comment about holding boundaries and laying down laws. That what happens is that concept usually sets up a kind of a fractioning of the family, where it's kind of us versus you, right? We're going to lay down this law and until you get well. And really how I look at it and how I work with families is I try to unify the family. And I say, we all as a family have a problem with the addiction. Alcohol is causing a problem for our whole family. Alcohol is causing a problem with the alcoholic because he's consuming all this, but alcohol is also, again, causing a problem in the whole family system. So by unifying together, we can fight this alcoholism, as opposed to dividing the family and you need to get help. So that has greater impact for long-term recovery.
This is a good time for me to ask this question. We talked about this before we went on camera, is that it's been pointed out to me that sometimes family members, and we'll use the functioning alcoholic, we keep coming back to that, family members are oftentimes, and you comment on this, if it's a myth, I'd like to know. Family members are often more upset about the fact that the addiction was kept secret than discovering there was an addiction in the first place. Is that true, or is that kind of melodramatic?
No, that's quite true, because secrecy is a huge symptom, I'm going to say, of addiction. And, secrecy, also, the lying, the cheating, the dishonesty.
Compounding the lies to keep it hidden, having to build lie upon lie.
And underneath all this is a huge shame, in the addicted individual. And I hear often a lot is like, why couldn't he or she have just told me what was going on? Why couldn't this have happened? And they could have just said, I'm doing this. I could have handled it a lot better. But that's the problem, is the shame involved with that, and saying, I had a slip up, or I've been stealing pills, or I've been doctor shopping, or I've been drinking, is so great. You can't get honest with your family member. And especially when you even look at long-term addiction use and the impact of the brain and where the brain goes with extended use.
What would you tell somebody then that's got this addiction, saying, hey, I know you, I mean, we could go on and on, right, about all the reasons people give and all the pretexts they come up with as to why they should keep it a secret. If you could reduce it to 1 or 2 sentences, what do you tell that person who's keeping it a secret, thinking, I'm not happy with it, I'm not proud of it, but it's the best, better the devil I know than to risk confronting my family member. In fact, let me just do this. Do you see a lot of people saying, well, if I tell my wife and kids, or my husband and kids about my addiction, they'll abandon me, they'll reject me, and I would rather suffer and even make them suffer because of my addiction than lose them. What would you tell somebody? I realize this could go on for weeks and months, but just where would you start? If somebody came to you and just said, I've got a problem and you're telling me I need to come clean to my family, I won't do it. What would you say in response to that?
Well, so I think even more so, the idea of coming clean with your family is about, I'm closing the door for my use, right?
Sure, and let's say I know, hey, Mr. Ott, I've got a substance abuse problem, and I don't like what it's doing to me, and I don't like what it's doing to my family. I don't even know the extent of what it's doing to me and my family. But don't ask me to tell my family as part of my recovery. Let me just take that dry drunk route. I like that dry drunk. So what are you going to tell them, just generally, even though this isn't a literal therapeutic session, what's the concept you're going to try to plant in my mind?
I'm going to tell them that until they can get honest, they're not going to be able to be sober.
Okay, so that I like that.
It's
What you're saying is that, look, I
simple.
know what you want. You can't get there unless you're willing to take this step.
Exactly.
Okay. Let me just explore this a little more.
Okay.
How do you help me get more comfortable with that idea? How do you help me confront my fear?
So a big piece of this here is to, it's kind of like saying, you know, how do you build a house?
Right. I know it's a broad question.
It's a very broad question because you're looking at the severity of the illness, of the alcoholism or drug addiction, and you're also looking at the specifics of the person, and you're saying these are the things that you need to get sober.
So you will do that. You'll
we need to individualize.
You'll get to know me and learn my background and what's triggering and feeding my addiction, because it can be different things for different people.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about what therapy will look like, which again is kind of like what kind of house I might be building. I understand that. So when you talk about helping the family heal, does that mean that my family and I all get together and meet with you once a week?
So it means a variety of things.
Right.
Okay. So let's look at what's effective in helping a person get sober. And again, the example I use is we use such broad terms in the addiction world. And if we talked about cancer and I said, you have cancer and therefore you need chemotherapy, well, that's really kind of generic and universal and in a sense ineffective.
And somebody who's a doctor would know, well, we know there are some cancers this person cannot have, because if the doctor said chemo, these cancers are not treated with chemotherapy.
Exactly.
Okay, so again, we understand this is broad, but this is for people that are either have a family member that they suspect has an addiction and they want to help and they've been and it's been resisted, or you may be the person facing the addiction. Please understand, we can't do this by proxy. So let me just ask a little bit about different kinds of therapy. So I've come to you and I've got a substance abuse problem, and we're not going to go into, I don't really have a substance abuse problem, but hypothetically.
Do you need an intervention?
Yeah, exactly. And so what are some of the things that you would do then? I mean, I assume there's individual therapy. I assume there's something called family therapy. I'm sure that can have many different forms. Would you tell people a little bit about what kinds of things would happen when there's a family involved, where a family member or more than one has an addiction? What kind of things is this family going to go through? And although it's individual and different for each family, about how long is it going to take? How frequently are they going to be meeting with a therapist or therapists, or therapists and physicians, or therapists or clergy member, whatever it might be? Could you give us a little idea? The reason I'm asking, James, is because I want people watching this to understand that it isn't a quick fix, but it's also something that you're going to actually come to like, and you're going to look forward to these meetings, and because you're going to see the progress, or you're going to say, I just feel so much better. It's better than any jolt that I got from the substances. Tell us a little bit about what it will be like, what it can be like, how long it will take, and then of course at the end, maybe how much this is going to cost, depending upon whether you've got insurance coverage or you're paying out of pocket. And do you have to use insurance? I mean, some people say, look, I want help, but I don't want there to be any record of this because I could lose my job.
Yes.
All right,
yes.
so start wherever you'd like.
That's
there.
A tall order, but I'll attempt it right
and
here.
And the good news is that's where we'll finish as well, because I think we will have come full circle then.
Yeah.
All right.
So when I work with families, I work with them in a variety of ways. I work with them as a therapist. I work with them as an interventionist. So it kind of depends here. My involvement with families as an interventionist is usually 6 to 12 months. And I'm meeting this family on a weekly and sometimes longer, sometimes shorter basis. I'm usually up front. It's once or twice a week, and then it calms down to about once a week.
When you say meeting with the family, does that mean you're always meeting with every single family member, or will it be one week I meet with everybody and then I might meet with just the patient or the addict, and then maybe the addict and the wife and husband, or can it take all? Okay, it just depends on the circumstances.
It just depends on the situation.
Okay.
Most of the time it's with the whole family.
Okay,
right?
yeah, good. That's what I was wondering.
And my initial meetings is about identifying the issue, and usually inviting the person to treatment, working with the family to have the person get treatment, whether that's residential level of care, where they're going to lots of group therapy, they're living in a facility, whether that's outpatient care, getting other providers involved, psychiatrists, pain clinics, family therapists, and couples therapists sometimes. So it's about, again, individualizing the treatment. And at the same time, as I continue to meet with the family, I'm providing them a lot of support and education. Because if a person goes off to treatment, you know, they suddenly get all this help and support, and the family's kind of left with all the wreckage. And so that's where my role comes in, is to come in and support the family, educate them, give them information about addiction and what's going on. And again, this is specific to their situation. Provide support, provide direction. Sometimes I have to do crisis management, intervene. Let's say your loved one goes off into a treatment center and then they leave against medical advice. They leave prematurely, so I would rally the family around and say, we need to get you back in, or we need to get you to another place, we need to get you the right level of care. So, you know, again, it's a variety of services, but the common denominator here is working with the family in what capacity they need to help their loved one get sober, and also to help shift the family patterns, the communication, the way we've been dealing with the addiction, looking at past histories of trauma or other horrible things that's happened in the family that impacts the addiction today, or the whole family today, really. So it's so vast and varied, with the common denominator being working with the family consistently.
But thanks for being willing to say, you know, in a range of 6 to 12 months. Everybody's different, but at least you can say there are some averages or some generalities.
Yes, yes.
Costs?
Well, so cost, again, is on a variety of levels. If you employ an interventionist, cost is somewhere around $6,000 to $10,000 for that 6 months, for that 6-month period. Sometimes, again, in my role, I at times work as an interventionist at that.
Is that all for the interventionist, or is that for the interventionist and all the other things associated with the interventionist? Okay, so that could, so if there's other people brought in, there are costs on top of that.
That's right. And then if I'm in the role as a family therapist, then it's different, and I can utilize insurance or take out of pocket, you know, just to pay me up front. There was that concern about people not wanting any sort of public record out there of these meetings.
That's not illegal, right, for me to come and pay you with cash?
No, it's not illegal.
Some people I know are concerned. They're like, well, I have to have a record. The law, no, the law does not require that I keep a record of my mental health care.
Yes. All right. Yes. No, it's not at all. And in fact, there's no general database that I, as a therapist, report
Glad you brought
to,
that up, right?
And the police or the government or whoever accesses it and says, "Oh, Bob Smith got therapy, and
now he's running for office, and everyone is going to know about it," or something like that.
There's no database or no anything.
Okay.
And the only person that knows that you've been to therapy is you and the therapist, and if you have the insurance, pay the insurance company. But there's some confidentiality laws with that as well.
All right. If someone would like to meet with you just for a consultation to determine whether it's my family member with the problem or myself with the problem, what do they do?
So call, email, look me up on the website. Again, my number is 385-313-0055. My email is james@redwillowcounseling.com, and my website is redwillowcounseling.com.
And if I did that, how long would I meet with you, and what would it cost me for an initial consultation?
So for the whole family consultation?
No, just me. I don't want my family to know about this yet. I'm not comfortable with that yet. It's just me wanting to talk to you to see if there's something, whether it be me with a concern about my family member or me because I'm the addict. Either way, if somebody wanted to come and meet with you for an initial consultation, what would that be?
So my rate is $130 an hour.
And would you meet with me for an hour? Or would you meet with me for 20 minutes? Or?
No, it'd be a full hour.
Okay.
And I also have other therapists in my office that have a variety of rates and services.
So I could ask about that as well?
You bet.
James, thank you so much. It's been very enlightening and very informative.
Thank you, Eric. It's good to be here.